What are you thinking about? Two maids were serving dishes, and the little girl sitting on Fanxian's right asked with a pouted mouth. The little girl has dark skin and is a little thin, so sitting next to the pretty girl like Fanxian, she looks particularly pitiful. Fanxian stretched out his hand, rubbed the yellow hair on the little girl's head, and said with a smile, "I was thinking about what kind of dishes you usually eat in Kyoto." This little girl, who is even younger than Fanxian, is Count Sinan's biological daughter, his half-sister, named Roro. Because she had been frail and sick since childhood, and the old lady felt sorry for her granddaughter, she was sent to Danjo to recuperate a year ago. It's just that after nearly a year of raising it, there has been no improvement. The hair on the head is still a little sparse. Officials are naturally not short of food and clothing, so it cannot be malnutrition, but probably congenital frailty. Fanxian and this little girl got along very well. Although he dealt with this little girl with an uncle's attitude, he just felt sorry for her, so he often played with her and told her stories, but in the eyes of others, he became their brother and sister. Evidence of deep love. It's just that Fanxian's status is a bit embarrassing. After all, an illegitimate child cannot be compared with a real lady, so the maids deliberately don't mention the matters at the Earl's house in Kyoto. Hearing her brother's question, the little girl stretched her fingers seriously and began to count the things she usually eats in Kyoto. But after counting, the 3-year-old girl couldn't remember anything. She could only talk about candied haws and noodles over and over again. People. After finishing the meal, it was already a little late. The sun had sunk halfway down on the other side of the land, and thick twilight enveloped the entire courtyard. Ruoruo, you are really weak. My brother bullied me. Okay, what do you want to hear today? Snow White. Fanxian suddenly laughed. Fortunately, there was no one else next to him. Otherwise, he would have been shocked to see this weird smile that only adults could have on the 4-year-old boy's face. Brother, can you tell me a ghost story?
No.
Fan Ruoruo was startled and shook his head desperately. 2 lines of tears immediately fell down his dark face. It was obvious that he had been poisoned by many ghost stories in the past year. Bullying little girls is just one of Fanxian's bad habits. What he is best at is bullying those maids. He often tells them ghost stories, and then scares the youthful girls into screaming and making everyone tremble in bed, huddle together. Although Fanxian couldn't tease them with words in order to cover himself up, he could always enjoy Xiangzi's greasy hug at this time. He comforted himself that he was still a child and still needed touch. These were not shameless, but just normal needs. And whenever the maids were curious about how the young master could know so many terrible stories at such a young age, Fanxian would put the blame on the teacher. So the maids now look at the teacher with a somewhat unkind look, thinking that the count paid a lot of money to hire you to teach the young master, but you actually told him a ghost story, which frightened the children and frightened us. These flowers, you have sinned too much. After the usual night talk of ghost stories ended, the 2 maids looked frightened but still satisfied as they waited on the little guy to wash them, then closed the door and let him sleep. It seemed like just another normal night. Fanxian laid aside the hard porcelain pillow under his head, went to the closet and took out his winter robe, arranged it into a square shape, and turned it into a pillow. He leaned on the pillow, but his eyes were open and shining in the dark night. He didn't fall asleep for a long time. Although I have accepted the fact that I have been reincarnated into this world, I may not be able to get used to this fact. It should be only about 9 o'clock in the evening and I am about to go to bed. It is really uncomfortable. What's more, he had slept in a hospital bed for long enough in his previous life. He touched the surface of the bed and found that the hidden grid he made would not be seen by others. He felt a little relieved. Naturally, the true energy in his body began to flow slowly, and he could enter that meditative state at any time. The moment before escaping into the state of nothingness, Fanxian thought, how should he live in this world? How should I live in the next few decades? Before she could enter a vegetative state and dream about the 3 wives and 4 concubines in the future, she was awakened by an uninvited guest. Are you Fanxian? Suddenly there was a person in front of his bed. His eyes were full of cold color, and his pupils were dyed with an unusual brown color. It was obvious at a glance that the person did not love life very much. It's a very polite question, But if it comes from someone who sneaks into your bedroom in the middle of the night with his face covered, a knife in his hand, and several small bags in his waist, it will undoubtedly be a question. Very frightening. Fortunately, Fanxian was not a real 4-year-old boy. Otherwise, he would have screamed out immediately when he saw this strange uncle. You can even think with your toes that a night traveler who can enter the Earl's residence quietly must be a very capable and ruthless guy. If he calls out, the other person will definitely kill him. Thinking of this, Fanxian couldn't help but feel a little proud of his ability to stay calm in times of crisis. He coughed twice, suppressed the immense nervousness deep inside his heart, pretended to be the cutest good boy, and pounced on him. "Dad, you are finally back." A 4-year-old boy threw himself into the arms of a certain killer with tears in his eyes, holding his waist tightly with both hands. However, the child's hands were too short, so he couldn't wrap his arms around him, so he had to hold on to the killer's clothes as hard as he could. I was afraid that the other party would just run away. Maybe it was because he was grabbing too hard, so with a hiss, the little boy tore off a piece of cloth from the opponent's hand. Nightwalker frowned, and without seeing any movement, he got out of Fanxian's arms and stood there blankly, seeming to be thinking about why the illegitimate son of Count Sinan wanted to call him daddy. At the same time, he was also very puzzled. His clothes were of the highest quality in the courtyard and could not be easily scratched even by a knife. How could this young child scratch them with his hands? He was puzzled, and Fanxian was even more puzzled to the point of vomiting blood. When no one was around, Fanxian often used rocks on the rockery to test the power of the nameless qi in his body. When he found that his delicate little fingers could barely crush it, behind those loose rocks, which were not very hard, he had a certain degree of confidence in his ability to defend himself. Fanxian finally used the 4-year-old boy's cry trick to make the other party relax his guard, and then channeled all his true power to his fingers, fully expecting to be able to restrain the other party, but who knew that he only managed to grab a few rags. "It looks like something is going to happen,"